In 525 BC, an entire Persian army, 50,000 elite soldiers, vanished into thin air in the sands of Egypt. Was it swallowed by a massive sandstorm, as the legend claims? Did it fall victim to sabotage, rebellion, or something more mysterious? Over the centuries, treasure hunters, archaeologists, and conspiracy theorists have all tried to uncover the truth behind what had happened to the army. In this video, we delve deep into one of ancient history's greatest unsolved mysteries. We'll discover the political chaos of the Persian Empire, explore the harsh and haunted expanse of Egypt's western desert, and even dive into the modern-day expeditions that claim to have found the remains of the missing army. This is the tale of the lost army of Cambyses. Our story begins with Cambyses II, the son of Cyrus the Great and ruler of the mighty Achaemenid Empire. This massive Persian kingdom stretched from the Mediterranean to the edge of India. By the 6th century BCE, the empire was a superpower, gobbling up territory and cultures at a relentless pace. But unlike Cyrus the Great, who was known for his wisdom and tolerance, Cambyses ruled with paranoia and fire. As his reign dragged on, Cambyses became erratic. He started executing his own officials, and he even murdered his own brother. Some sources say he stabbed his pregnant sister wife to death in a fit of rage, while others claim he began hallucinating, screaming at shadows in the night. After conquering Egypt in 525 BCE, Cambyses didn't just take the throne, he tried to erase Egyptian culture. He mocked their gods, looted their temples, and even killed the sacred Apis bull, a living symbol of their divine kingship. Whether that's fact or Greek propaganda, one thing's clear. Cambyses was a crazed conqueror who wanted to rule a large part of the ancient world. But even though he had seized the Egyptian throne, Cambyses couldn't conquer the hearts of the people. The Egyptians saw him not as a pharaoh, but as a foreign invader. Because of this, rebellions flared throughout the country, and Egypt became a place impossible for him to control. At the center of that resistance was the Oracle of Amun, a sacred temple tucked away in the remote Siwa oasis. More than just a religious site, the Oracle was a symbol of divine legitimacy, a place where kings were blessed by the gods, and where pharaohs had gone for centuries to confirm their rule. Even Alexander the Great would make the pilgrimage there a few centuries later. Cambyses knew this, and according to legend, when he sent messengers to consult the oracle, it refused to recognize him as Egypt's rightful king. To Cambyses, that was more than an insult. It was one of the highest forms of treason. So he made a decision, not just to challenge Egypt militarily, but spiritually. He would crush the Oracle of Amun, and with it, the last divine voice that denied his crown. So Cambyses sent an army, not just to intimidate, but to destroy the temple and crush the oracle's influence altogether. 50,000 Persian soldiers, a force large enough to overwhelm any oasis, were dispatched from Thebes, marching west into the unknown. Their path would take them across the western desert, one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. Today, it's called the Great Sand Sea, and for good reason. This wasn't just any desert. It was a labyrinth of scorching dunes and salt flats, stretching for hundreds of miles with no natural water, no shade, and death at every turn. By day, the soldiers faced blistering heat, temperatures soaring well above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind could shift in seconds, kicking up walls of sand that erased both footprints and direction. At night, the cold bit through the armor and cloth, and any supplies that they had would be quickly consumed due to the harsh conditions. Navigation was nearly impossible. There were no landmarks, just an ocean of beige and gold, constantly reshaping itself. The plan was simple: reach Siwa, destroy the temple, and return as the uncontested rulers of Egypt. But somewhere between the oasis of Karga and their final destination, the army vanished, and no one was left to tell the tale. For centuries, no one knew what happened, and for some, the mystery only deepened, because as Egypt resisted, Cambyses continued to spiral into madness, and the empire he had built began to stretch thin, so he never got around to launching an investigation to figure out what had happened to all of those unfortunate soldiers. When news first broke that 50,000 Persian soldiers had vanished into the desert, the ancient world attempted to explain the mystery with stories. The story goes that the army had marched west from Thebes, reached an oasis called Karga, and then, 7 days into the desert, they were suddenly engulfed by a massive sandstorm. A divine punishment, some claimed, summoned by the gods of Egypt themselves. The wind howled for days, and the dunes simply rose up and buried the army alive. It sounds mythical, but in a world still ruled by oracles and omens, many took it as the truth. And so for centuries, no one dared to look deeper. After all, how do you find an army swallowed by the desert? And more importantly, why would you want to? The area was considered cursed, haunted, and even sacred. Travelers avoided it, locals whispered about it, and even the Egyptian pharaohs, obsessed with the afterlife, left it untouched. Some believe the army never made it past Thebes, that it was ambushed by rebels or mutinied against Cambyses and was quietly covered up. There were rumors that the soldiers were likely ambushed by Pertubastes, a rebel who declared himself king of Egypt. Since Pertubastes and his army knew the land well, they could have attacked in the middle of the desert, while the Persians were exhausted and unaware. Cambyses had a history of overestimating his army's strength, putting them in danger, which made many believe his troops entered the desert with barely any supplies or food. This wasn't the first time he led his army into such harsh conditions. In a previous campaign, he took them up the River Nile into Ethiopia, which ended in disaster. As their limited food ran out, soldiers were forced to resort to eating the flesh of their own comrades under the scorching sun of the Nubian desert. Eventually, the Persian army returned home in great shame, having never even engaged the enemy in battle. Many scholars believe that Cambyses' diminishing reputation created frustration and discontent among the troops. The relentless heat and lack of resources likely exacerbated these issues. Bloodshed followed, and those who managed to survive fled to the Dakhla oasis, where they sought refuge with Pertubastes. But there were also some mythical theories on what had happened. One being that the army never died, just vanished, pulled into the underworld by gods angered at their presence. That they still march, eternally lost in dunes, a ghost army cursed to wander. With each generation that passed, the lost army became less of what had actually happened and more of a legend, one that would stay buried for over 2,000 years, until someone dared to search for them again. In the early 20th century, as the field of archaeology boomed, the legend of Cambyses' lost army began attracting some of the most dedicated adventurers determined to make a name for themselves. In 1933, an Egyptian desert explorer named Laszlo Almasi, who was actually the same man who had inspired the award-winning English Patient, set out to the Great Sand Sea, convinced he could trace the army's final path. Almasi was no amateur. He was a skilled pilot, cartographer, and desert survivalist. But despite his effort, he returned with no conclusive evidence, and the mystery lived on. Until the 1980s, when two amateur archaeologists, Angelo and Alfredo Castiglione, a pair of Italian brothers, claimed they had done the impossible. Using satellite images, eyewitness reports from local tribes, and excavations, the Castigliones explored a remote site near the Gilif Kabir Plateau, a desolate stretch few dared cross. There, they said, they found fragments of bronze weapons, arrowheads, human bones, and what looked like the remains of burial pits, all dating back to the 6th century BCE. Their theory? The army had split, gotten lost, and perished in a sandstorm, or from dehydration. They believed they had found one of the final campsites of the doomed soldiers. Even though the discovery was massive and made headlines across the globe, there were still many doubts. Critics said the artifacts could have come from other periods, and said that the evidence wasn't nearly strong enough. They had also claimed that the Castigliones were treasure hunters, not trained archaeologists. Some even accused them of fabricating the find to gain fame. Another study done in 2015 by Professor Olaf E. Kaper of the University of Leiden challenged the idea that Cambyses sent his soldiers to destroy a temple. Rather, he sent them out to conquer Pertubastes. The excavation during this study found the remains of a temple, decorated in his name, that had been erected in the Dakhla oasis. Their research found that Pertubastes successfully led a revolt against Persian control, which resulted in being crowned in Memphis, and taking charge of Upper Egypt. His reign lasted long enough for him to start important building projects in the Dakhla oasis, a likely stronghold for his power. However, Pertubastes was eventually defeated by Darius the Great, who was a ruler of Persia after Cambyses, because Darius wanted to erase Pertubastes from history. They believe that he spread a false story about a sandstorm, rewriting history books to fit his narrative. However, expeditions have continued into the 2000s and 2010s, using everything from ground-penetrating radar to satellite mapping. But to this day, no one has definitively found the remnants of Cambyses' army, and it remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the ancient world.